on Pesach Sheni, we're going to mark the 43rd yurtzeit of my grandfather, Avram ben Chaim. My paternal grandfather uh, passed away on Pesach Sheni Tafshin Mem Aleph in 1981, which was a few months before I was born. I was born on the 10th of Shvat Tafshin Mem Beis. Not so that was barely 9 months later. I was named for my grandfather, and I never got to meet him. And I got to meet him, but we are still going to mark his passing on Pesach Sheni, which will be sometime next week. After it'll be before our next meeting. And my other grandfather, my maternal grandfather, Mr. Emmerich Schwartz, Yitzchak Isaac Kohen, he survived my paternal grandfather by some 25 years. He only passed away in Tafshin Samech Zion when I was 24 years old and already a father. He passed away shortly after my first daughter's birth. So he was around a lot longer, and he was a Holocaust survivor, and I knew him. I spent most of my Passover Seder's until that point with my grandfather. So he was my real connection to the past. And we are going to mark his passing in Mar Cheshvan. So what we have here are the halachot that the Rambam brings based on the Gemara, of course, that contrast the three types of Passovers. What are the three types of Passovers? The Passover as it was in Egypt, the Passover as it was in the temple, and the Passover that is the second Passover. I like to start by saying that we saw already how the day of Korban Pesach, what's now called Erev Pesach, was actually Chag Pesach according to strictly biblical language, and Chag Masot is the 7-day festival that is afterwards. It actually has some dinim of Chol Moed. For example, the Yisur Melacha kicks in the afternoon when it's time to offer the Korban. Because after all, it's time for sacrifice in the temple, so it'd be inappropriate to fast. At that point, it's a happy day. And the question is, do some places even take in this quasi festival, and it's prohibited malacha already from the morning? That was what the discussion was. However, we have not found, maybe someone could enlighten me about this, any havamina that the day of Pesach Sheni, even though that afternoon in the temple they're practicing, they're practically speaking, they're having Korban Pesach, we have not seen that day is considered a holiday in any way, not even like Chol Moed, not even like Rosh Chodesh. There's no Isser Malacha. Perhaps there's no prohibition to fast except for those who actually bring Korbanot. And also that night when the Korban Pesach Sheni is eaten, we haven't seen anything pertaining to that night. Okay, so let's get into the halachot over here. When the sages discuss this, they only talk about what is done at the Seder. How is the Pesach eaten? How is it different? And this could be quite surprising to some. So if you have any questions right in the middle, please ask. The Rambam asks, Ma bein Pesach Rishon lePesach Sheni. What's the difference between the first Passover and the second Passover? Rishon asur bechametz v'val yirayeh v'val yimaseh. On the first Passover, we have this prohibition of leaven in the house. You can't see it can't be seen, and it can't be found. Got to get rid of your chametz, beer chametz. That exists with the first Passover. Further, we saw the Passover should not be slaughtered when the Kohen, or the people for whom the Passover is being slaughtered, those who intend to eat this Passover, they're not allowed to own any chametz. And the Passover has to be eaten within the defined boundaries where the group is. So in the room they choose, or if they've divided a room with putting up a mechitza, a partition, so they have to stay within there. They can't remove the Passover's meat, and if they would remove it from that defined area, then they would be disqualifying that meat. So that exists with the first Passover. And the Hallel has to be recited as part of its ritual consumption. So we happen to say Hallel after we Korban Pesach. And many places, the custom is to recite the Hallel the night of Passover before going to Seder when you're supposed to eat Korban Pesach. Either way, This practice persists. Even those who do not have Korban Pesach say the Hallel. So everybody says it after the rest of the Seder, but there's some places they also have this practice. They just say Hallel beforehand. It's a little bit redundant now because thank God we know how to say Hallel at home, as we discussed in previous years. Umveini mo chagiga. And the first Passover can come with an optional chagiga. We also saw not in all circumstances, but this sacrifice is there so that there's more meat to eat. We have shar she'avo b'tuma im nitma rov alcohol. And the first Passover can be performed in a state of impurity if the majority are impure. With what? Tumaf meith k'moshe b'yarnu, with death impurity. If everybody's just a ball carrier or something like that, or nidos, whatever it is, so they should be going to the mikvah and getting rid of it. It's harder to get rid of tumaf meith, obviously, even though, like the rabbi also said and others, it's just a practical thing that we haven't prepared the ashes of the red heifer, although we could and perhaps we should. No, not perhaps. We definitely should. The only question is why we're not doing it. However, Pesach Sheni, chametz u'matzah imo b'bayit. The leaven and the matzah are in the house. He has some matzah around, but he has no prohibition of having chametz. He has no commandment from the sages to go search for the chametz and destroy it. Tashbisu. There's no such thing. He could have bread in the kitchen, maybe even bread on the table. And they didn't go so far. It says chametz imo b'bayit, but not imo al shulchan. It's in the house, but it doesn't have to be on the table. We know ta'un halel be'achila, though. Don't have to say halel as part of the consumption of Korban Pesach, Sheni. Umotzino, though, chutz leveit achila, though. It doesn't have to stay in its place. It could just, a person could move the meat around. It wouldn't disqualify it. Wein mivini mo chagiga. There's no chagiga attached to it. Ve'no ba v'tuma. And it's also not brought if the majority are in a state of impurity. Eino ba v'tuma can be understood as it shouldn't be brought if the first Pesach was brought Batuma, as we saw. And if everybody's Tameh, comes time for Pesach Sheni, assuming the first one was done right. So now there will be a Pesach Sheni for those who missed it. If everybody's suddenly Tameh for whatever reason, there's not going to be Pesach Sheni. But both override the Sabbath. It could be the 14th of Nisan, the 14th of Iyar are on Shabbos. They go through with Shechting the Korban Pesach, even though technically it's a Malacha. Utunin Halel Ba'asiyatan. And when it's processed in the temple, the Levites recite the Hallel. And they're both eaten in Bayith Echad al Matzah Maror. Means Bayith Echad, in this case, it's eaten with one group, the Minuyim. Al Matzah Maror. It's eaten with Matzah and Maror. I like to address this issue over here. The Rambam talks about the Bayis Echad, and within its mechitzas, the Rambam says, hang on a second. Let me get the exact word. Here, in the 9th parak, I'm going to put on the screen. It's very interesting what the Rambam says here. Not allowed to remove it from the chavura. What does it mean, removing it from the chavura of this group? It doesn't mean from the particular people. It means from the house, as it says, "Lo tutzi min habayit min habasar chutza." Okay, don't take it out of the house. It has to be eaten within its group. This is different than the expression that it's only eaten by its minuyim. So there's a thing. There's one din looks at the people, only those people can eat it. And then there's the din that it has to stay within the bayit or the chavura. It's physical boundaries. Lo totzimin habayit min basar kutza. Okay. Let's try not to confuse those two. So that's what the Rambam's discussing over here when he says over here, ve'ein motzim mimenu chutz lachavura. You can't take it out, but the second Pesach, you could take it out. Okay? You can't take it out. But over here, okay, this is a distinction. Can be the second Pesach can be taken out, but when it says here, that pasuk, is talking about the menuyim. Okay? And that's why it said so yeah, it can only be the particular people, the minuyim. That's what it means over here. Ve'ein motrin mehen. Further, we do not leave over any of them. Ve'ein shovrin behen et etzem. And we don't have any. By the way, leave over mean until sunrise. It says dawn. Dawn is before sunrise. The meat gets sold until sunrise. Dawn. Then it will become disqualified. It's considered mothar. It has to be burned after yontif, of course. Ve'ein shovrin behen et etzem. And you can't break any of the bones of the Pesach. So these are what they have in common. Okay, so we saw some differences and compare and contrast the first Pesach and the second Pesach. Question is, so why shouldn't they be entirely the same? We saw they have things in common, they have things different. They should just be the same across the board. Doesn't it say, with regards to Pesach Sheni, concerning all the enactments of the Passover, shall you do the second one? The Fisha Pirash Bo Mikzat Chukot Pesach. Then it gave an example. It says, do it exactly like Pesach. And then it says a few examples. Really, it's only like the Pesach Rishon, which is explicit. Those ones that apply to the actual korban. You can eat it without breaking its bones. Eat it, only those who are meant to eat it can eat it. But eating with having no marrow around, having no chametz around, that's not anything having to do with the actual goof of the Pesach, the second Pesach. Those are the ones that he included in this example. You go see the details of the Gemara. It's actually quite interesting how Chazal derived which halachas of Pesach Sheni are like the first and which are not, which ones are excluded from this. When it says concerning what they did in Egypt, that the Passover lamb, or I guess the goat, had to have been set aside already from the 10th of the month, which is what they did. That was Shabbos HaGadol. That's specific to that one event in history. The fact that they had to apply the blood to the doorposts and to the lintel, also, that was unique. How they eat it b'chipazon, it says, you should have your loins girded and your walking sticks in your hand, act like you're about to leave Egypt. Those aspects do not apply for the rest of history. Those were only done for the first Passover as it was in Egypt. Okay, so now we see the difference. Like I said, you're not going to find anywhere that you even have to have a Seder. Not only is it that Pesach Sheni, the day that's offered in the temple, is not considered Yom Tov, that night, there's no Isser Malacha, there's no Kiddush. Apparently, there's also no mitzvah Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, no Arba Kosos, no Haggadah. There's nothing much to do. Just have to make sure to eat the Passover, like it says here. You take your Pesach Sheni, and you make sure that you do it on Shabbos, and you make sure to say Hallel when it's being offered. Make sure it's being roasted and eat it with matzah and maror, and don't leave anything over. Very interesting. And I guess that'll bring us to a conclusion for today. We have to be going soon, so don't forget to like, share, send your questions and comments, and we hope and pray that we see an end to our suffering and that we be spared the worst consequences of our actions, because, as Moshe Rabbeinu said, Ki l'chol ha'am b'shvara. We're all technically shogegim, and that should be taken into account and based on Shamal. We live to see the destruction of Israel's enemies speedily in our days. Have a Shabbat Shalom.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.